who face eternity easily forget what a lifetime means, what an ending means.
You know it doesn't have to be this way.
No, Kunavine, it does. They need me.
Welcome back to End of Dragons Daily. We didn't do one yesterday because there was a new patch for the finale of the Icebrood Saga. I won't be talking about that here. There won't be footage of that here. Don't worry, no spoilers whatsoever. We're going to keep it strictly about the upcoming expansion. I'm also recording a little bit later at night in what turns out to be like gale force winds and torrential rain, so if there sounds like there's some weird fuzz in the background, it's not that my microphone's of a low quality today, it's just this crazy rain hammering on the window. It's actually kind of nuts. Anyway, yes, I'm recording a little bit later today, kind of got into Warhammer a bit and occupied a lot of my time. The evening just kind of ran away from me here, but let's get to it. Today we're going to be talking about Kaineng. I kind of just threw this topic up because I'm curious about the city as a region in terms of gameplay, in terms of how it will express its story and the stuff we learned in the movement of the world. It's kind of rich. I mean, to say that about the city, in truth, I think all the regions of Kantha have a lot that we could dig into, except maybe Xingji, I don't know, Sumi, but it feels like it's just a bit more of the generic of the locations. So here's some of your thoughts, and I'll bounce my ideas back off of them, starting off with Beast Tamer, who says, I want Kaineng to feel like it's the city version of Tangled Depths. Now this is a conversation. Massive, uncomfortable, and with confusing layouts so that you can easily get lost in the streets. City that makes you feel absolutely minuscule and insignificant compared to it. Now, that last sentence, I completely agree. That is the thing you want to go for with Kaineng, and I think ArenaNet accomplished that in Guild Wars 1 with its more limited avenues for movement and exploration. Like, you couldn't even go into any of the buildings, really, in that game. It made it very easy to feel like you were just a small part of this larger city. Even stuff down to, like, how they did the world map art, where you would press M and you'd see all this sprawling slumland for miles and miles and miles. None of it was actually accessible within the game. And then they did even weird stuff like mixing the fantasy with it, like when you go to the Napui Quarter mission and all of a sudden there's like the celestial starry sky and you're not even really sure what the hell's going on anymore, but you're still in the city, sort of. All those things made the city feel big and rich. Stuff like the Zhangwang Skyway above the Undercity was cool because it kind of gave that suggestion that maybe this pancake, this layering, was happening all over the city. It's just that you can only really experience that in these few places. So the question is, how did they do that in Guild Wars 2? Here's the thing. I don't think the answer is to go like Tangled Depths. Now, look, don't get me wrong. I love Tangled Depths. I have talked for years about how it's one of my favorite exploration experiences that I've had in Guild Wars 2. And I liked that sense of being lost, and I liked that sense of being uncomfortable, and that things weren't so linear. I did enjoy that. But I think it's pretty clear that most of this game's community don't like that. For as many people there are out there that kind of appreciate that Tangled Depths was offering us something different to the standard fare, and we liked it for the art of it, and we kind of appreciated the experience of being lost. For as many people that felt that way, I think there were many, many, many more who were just annoyed that they couldn't get their next mastery point, or were just annoyed that they couldn't figure out how to climb up this cliff and grab whatever random map objective was up there. And it is still to this day one of the most controversial maps they've done. I personally think, if we look at the development of Path of Fire, there were opportunities to do something like Tangled Depths there too. And you need a bit of imagination for this, because obviously Path of Fire came out and the devs didn't go with this. But I can imagine a Tangled Depths-ish experience, say in the Desolation, where the implementation of the sulphurous haze is, you know, more deadly, more dangerous, and things are a bit obscure. But like I said, ArenaNet shied away from that. And at no point in any of the Living World updates or Path of Fire stuff, at no point since Tangled Depths itself, have they gone back to that idea. So I don't think you'll find this with Kaineng. And let's talk a little bit about Guild Wars 1 as well. They kind of did it in Guild Wars 1 too. I kind of feel like Tangled Depths is a lot like Guild Wars 1 Kaineng. There, even to this day, when I go back, like last year, you remember I did some new build and hero compositions, and we did some stuff with the trading card game. I did a whole playthrough of Guild Wars 1, like an abridged playthrough of the faction storyline last year. And even now, when I go back to the game, I find I can get lost in Kaineng, because the way that the map art works and the pathing works and how you can't even jump over stuff, something that feels like it should be right next to you, turns out it's not, because you're kind of high up a cliff and the NPC you want to speak to or whatever is low down. And yeah, it's just kind of annoying. It's frustrating. What I think really the devs need to do, if they want to provide this experience of being lost and dwarfed by this big city, is have an experience of being lost as one of these one and done things, like a part of the personal story that, people aren't going to be regularly going back to. Because putting a player through it just once, maybe they'll appreciate it and enjoy it, but having it there actually in the open world or whatever, a core part of the experience that people will be repeatedly going through, I think is just going to frustrate people. You don't want to subject them to something that is kind of deliberately negative, if you will, over and over and over again. So I do think in Guild Wars 2 they can do it, they just need to parcel it off to the right place. And while Guild Wars 1 definitely did it, I don't know whether I believe that just feeling lost is what made that city as big as it felt. I think it's all that other stuff I mentioned at the beginning of this question. So yeah, that's kind of my answer there. I love Tangled Depths, but I actually wouldn't recommend that kind of thing for Kaineng in Guild Wars 2. Do that in a very small parcel somewhere sort of that everyone will go through, but maybe just once or twice. Ruron's talking about aesthetics. He says, I want to see Kaineng in all its blocky and gritty glory. Hopefully even taller and more sprawling than in Guild Wars 1. I think that not being able to mount within the city would be brilliant, maybe due to air pollution, making it unhealthy for mounts. Although I would want to use mounts elsewhere in the expansion. Hopefully we'll get at least one map fully dedicated to Kaineng, with maybe a few others containing fringe bits. I think masteries could be used for city navigation, like using the ropes the Ampha used to drop from higher parts of the city to attack us back in GW1. Yeah, if people don't know this, there were these street thugs, the Ampha, and many of them would pop up out of nowhere to attack you. There were pop-up groups that had happened a lot in Guild Wars already, like a Devourer burrowing out of the ground, but they had this cool animation where they'd sort of sling down from the rooftops and attack you, as though they'd been waiting in ambush, and they used these ropes to get down. I like that idea, and in fact we've kind of already seen a little bit of that rope swinging kind of stuff with the Living World Season 3 mastery that we got in Draconis Mons and used a little bit more elsewhere. I don't think they could directly port that experience over, but being able to do that Spider-Man style moving through the city would catch a lot of people's attentions. I think the thing that Guild Wars 2 really has to do to pull this off, and a lot of you guys have got this idea of being able to climb and really experience the verticality, is they need to make the city as tall as possible. Like in Guild Wars 1, you could feel like you were in some narrow alleyway with these high buildings on the left and right, but the truth is they weren't that high. They just didn't need to be that high because the camera wasn't pulling out as much as it does in Guild Wars 2. There was no jumping and no mounts and stuff like that. In the sequel, if people are especially going to be allowed to ride around on a Springer or whatever, all of a sudden these seemingly once high buildings are not going to seem that way at all, and you're going to have this weird experience where it's mostly just walking around on flat, boring rooftops. I don't like the thought of that, so I think the best fix is they just expand it vertically as much as possible, so they're really high buildings, and these alleyways that we're now walking through, maybe shrouded in darkness, are really deep down and really closed off and very narrow. Then I can start to see it. You also give this idea about the mounts, like, oh, there's too much pollution to ride them. People really get caught up on this a lot of the time. I don't think that the in-game, plausibility reason that you invent for why we can't ride a mount matters much. But I saw someone else, I think a couple of days ago, actually, we weren't specifically talking about Kaineng at the time, but suggested that it's just because there's too many people around. Maybe you can't ride mounts in the city because, you're going to bump into the various citizens. And while that's maybe not as strong of an idea of this pollution thing, it does get me curious about something else, which is how many random NPCs are there going to be? How city-like will this feel? And how populated? Because even in the most populous areas of Guild Wars 2, like you take Divinity's Reach or Lion's Arch or something, they can still be quite sparse with the number of citizens that are around. And what, now we're talking about an entire map, a Path of Fire-sized map filled with buildings and stuff that's supposed to all be populated? There's going to be so many NPCs. Surely that's going to cause some server strain or some issues technologically for the devs. Will they do something else special, or are they just going to have it feeling a bit empty a lot of the time? In the first game, in all honesty, a lot of those explorable areas only felt like they had a lot of people there because you had stuff to fight. Like you had Zombie Afflicted to fight, or you had Jade Brotherhood, or you had Ampha. But once they were dead, the place was basically just a wasteland. And does that mean that that's what we'll get maybe a bit more of in End of Dragons 2? Ismail Sanibria says, for Kaineng, I'd like to get a feeling that people really don't want us there, as if by the fact that we're foreigners or because the commander always brings trouble wherever he goes. In every expansion, it's always been, oh, commander, thank you for coming to save us, so I'd appreciate the complete opposite of that. It's funny you're asking for this because some of the last content they added in the original game, the Winds of Change arc, really did start to do that. It started to question, is the commander always right? Is it possible for the commander to mess up? Should the commander stay away? Obviously, you weren't called the commander at the time, but the player character of Guild Wars 1. They started doing that around that point, and it's funny now that a decade later in a whole new game, we're going to the same area of the world, and people are starting to ask for the same kinds of things. I think really where your comment here is coming from is just, again, this place where the very black and white heroes versus dragons story might be getting a bit played out by this point. People wanted to move on. And it's a good sign, I think, then, that as we go to Cantha, it's the end of dragons. And we'll be positioned immediately in this really rich area of the world where there's so many different factions, people of different persuasions and worldviews that now we're coming into clash with. You know, I think that they kind of touched on some of this stuff about overthrowing dictators and authoritarianism and stuff when we were in the Palawa Joko arc of the story, and I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those come forward, because again, I think, as far as I remember, a lot of the community enjoyed that when we were dealing with Palawa, and now you know that we'll be looking at the current emperor of Cantha and what they've been doing. I do think we should respect what the Winds of Change said, by the way, and how it talked about their isolationism and their xenophobia. I know some people are out there saying, oh, no, they shouldn't do that at all because that's what we're expecting. I'm not sure this is one of those places where you want to subvert what everyone's looking forward to. I mean, the movement of the world was specifically written to give us a taste of what's coming. To then just suddenly turn around on it and turn your back on it seems weird to me. Though, then again, a lot of elements of the movement of the world were turned away from, like the mistrust between humans and Norn and stuff like that. It's a really fascinating article if you guys haven't checked it out. Zio says, mostly I want to recognise Kaineng. I want to be nostalgic about it. I feel Guild Wars 2 has really dropped the ball the majority of the time in how it reimagines the same locations from Guild Wars 1 to Guild Wars 2. Now, that's an interesting comment immediately, because in my opinion, all ArenaNet has been trying to do since Guild Wars 2 came out is retread Guild Wars 1 areas, and they're trying to recapture Guild Wars 1 nostalgia. In fact, I know several people that feel like because they never played Guild Wars 1, they're like missing out, that the game isn't really catering to them. So almost to a fault, I think the studio has chased the dream of Guild Wars 1 too much. Maybe we shouldn't be going to Cantha and End of Dragons at all, right? You could make that argument. So they've been going that hard with it, and then a comment like yours to say they're not even doing it well. Ooh. I feel only Vabi really hit a similar level of scale that Guild Wars 1 had in comparison to 2. So I want Kaineng to be big, I want it to be vast, dense, urban sprawl. I want to be able to traverse it like Batman, to have chase sequences over rooftops. I want interiors to buildings, and I want the same feeling of an urban jungle the first game did so well. I'm so happy to see a comment where someone mentioned interiors. To me, this has always been the big thing that Guild Wars 2 can do better than the old game, in that we actually get to go indoors now. And in a weird way, that kind of makes, I think, a whole city a nightmare to design from like an environment standpoint, because all of a sudden there's so much stuff that they could originally just block off and say this is not explorable, and now it's like, okay, this could be explorable. Are we going to let them or not? I actually think Divinity's Reach, the Ossen Quarter, it has some really good examples of nice city type areas where there are a lot of doors that you can open up and go inside, and very intricate small little interiors. Ruickton has some great ones as well. Divinity's Reach, really, if you guys want some more inspiration about all the ways in which the devs can play with interiors and sort of jam-packed spaces, definitely go there, because they've got some great examples. Stuff that I actually haven't seen them do for years since, right? I mean, only Divinity's Reach really has them. Maybe Lion's Arch once upon a time did, but we know that that looks like Disneyland now. Hopefully Kaineng won't be a Disneyland type experience. As for writing, it should tie into the movement of the world stuff. I want to see xenophobic human race-based society dealing with the mistreatment of other intelligent races, like how Lebo didn't understand Hyo-Son was Norn. Well, hold on. We don't know that Hyo-Son was a Norn, okay? Let's try and be clear here. That's just an idea. It's not fact. It's not canon. Anyway, I would love a commentary on overthrowing a corrupt system, the dynastic empire, and it overreaching the Ministry of Purity compared to the broken cycle of the Elder Dragons. A vast city with a repressive government has so many interesting human relatable stories to tell. Like, how are the Kurziks and Luxons doing if they were forced to integrate with Canthans and Kaineng? Was that integration equitable? Has more of a caste system developed since the unification? The idea of unifying and bringing the Kurziks and the Luxons into the fold is, again, another really cool part that I'm actually concerned the devs might end up dropping the ball on. What you're talking about here takes a lot of text, a lot of characters to really get to know, a lot of opportunities for people to deliver their worldviews, a lot of things to dive deep into. And frankly, Heart of Thorns, I felt didn't dive deep enough into its subject material and moved too quickly. Path of Fire, I felt didn't dive deep enough into much of its subject material. Some of it did very well, but a lot of it didn't. And I kind of don't have that many hopes for End of Dragons, to be honest, to really, really deliver on these things as well as you're hoping, because there's just so much for them to get to. This is why I kind of liked the idea that maybe the Echo-Vowed Forest wouldn't be in the expansion at launch, just like how Corner wasn't in Path of Fire. You know, Corner wasn't there, Istan wasn't there. We got those in Living World, and hopefully that allows them to more properly deal with the subject material in turn. If they try to do everything all at once, like all the different branches of the Ministry, and yes, these vassal states and how they're looking, as well as the treatment of the Tengu and what's going on in Shinji, it's just, you know, I think it's going to be an explosion and possibly a mess if they try to do too much at once. Anyway, another thing I really want to talk about, this is a great comment for, is looking at Vabi, because in a weird way, Vabi is a great example too of, you know, kind of supposed to be a city area. I mean, Vabi isn't a city, but it had lots of built-up city-type places, like the Kodash Bazaar and the Garden of Saborin. And I think you're totally right to identify they did well with that in Guild Wars 2. And how was it they did well with it? Well, they just made this stuff gargantuan, didn't they? Like, think of any kind of structure, maybe near one of the bounty boards in Vabi, you know, where that meta event is, where you're in, like, the court chambers and you're fighting the judges and so on. These rooms and these places are huge. They also took some other built-up urban areas and just destroyed them with the brand, and so now you get to explore them while they're rubble and they're kind of ruined a bit. I wouldn't be surprised if they do something of that in End of Dragons as well. We won't necessarily have Kralkatorrik fly over it this time, he's gone, but we could have some kind of other big event, maybe flooding, or I actually think the idea of a fire throughout Kaineng is a great idea, and there was a small section of one of the maps in Guild Wars 1 that had been on fire, and you had these cool, like, weird scavenger creatures that you could fight. I think they dropped a unique green, didn't they? In one of the areas of the city. I like that idea too. A great fire sweeping through Kaineng. That could be a good story beat that also allows them to implement a lot of a city that is deserted and broken down and kind of works out. Lord Krull says, just a small correction about the Alliance's statement. They did, in fact, mention it during the Extra Life 24 Hours stream. It wasn't really any information other than acknowledging a question in chat about it, but the fact that they even bothered commenting on the question would suggest it's in the works. They could easily have ignored it. Well, there you go. I had missed this. I guess there was a tiny little bit of news about Alliances, and yeah, something to take heart in, so there you have it. And then finally, Victor Manuel Santiago says, the water level rised about 60 feet high interior, so Kaineng is most likely flooded. Raisu Palace standing on a beach and the whole city rebuilt up hills, leaving a bunch of flooded sewers and the old Kaineng as a huge underwater playground. So, what you've said here, I like the idea of a lot of sewer stuff around Kaineng. Guild Wars still lacks some cool sewer content. I was hoping for it back when Lake Doric came out, and then they never really did much. I think this is a great opportunity. You're totally right. We kind of got a bit of sewer content with Lion's Arch, and in fact, the original Lion's Arch, I mean, and still some of the personal story instances that you can play through. And in fact, that's what your comment makes me think of a lot. Old LA. Do you guys remember you could swim deep under the city and there were all these ruined ships and stacks of wood and flotsam around? Maybe they would do stuff like that with Kaineng, but I have to say, this idea of it flooding just because of the rise of ore, I'm not buying it. One thing you've got to know is that Guild Wars is really inconsistent when it comes to the whole water level thing. You know, that Lion's Arch got flooded and Old LA is underwater, but there's a lot of other locations that should be flooded and aren't. They're not consistent about it. I really don't think that Kaineng is going to have been flooded in the way that you think it is. Maybe some new stuff to do with the Deep Sea Dragon will flood it, and maybe they'll combine the idea of this city with tentacle eldritch monsters that are roaming in water and stuff. Maybe you'll get that. But as far as the whole ore thing, don't listen to it, especially considering that the movement of the world itself, which first described the flooding and the rising of ore, did not say that Kaineng had been flooded. You know, if you're going to say Kaineng was flooded, you'd have to say stuff like Istan was flooded and everything else. Like, it's just inconsistent, I know, but I wouldn't read into it. I think it's fine, and any kind of water issues we have will probably be because of the deep sea dragon. And indeed, I hope that there are some. Well, there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and the footage as well of me faffing around getting this runic cape collection going, where I have to follow in the footsteps of some of the Steel Warband. I have to admit, I completely forgot to invite you guys in the guild to play along with me today, but I will be doing that tomorrow as well. And just a happy little reminder, we're recruiting if you guys want to join. You just need to send me a mail in-game. All the details are in Discord in the link below. As for tomorrow's topic, let's do this again. You guys can continue talking about Kaineng, anything you feel like I've missed here, but let's do the same idea. Let's pick a region and just see what we want from it. I'm going to go with the Jade Sea. The Jade Sea, which was, once upon a time, my absolute favourite area in the entire franchise. I remember my giddy excitement, desperate to find that place on my first playthrough ever of Factions, and I want something similar in Guild Wars 2. What do you guys think it will be like? Let's talk about the state of its melting and stuff, what we've seen in the trailers. Thanks everybody, really, for the support on this series. It's wonderful. I hope we can keep going. Please feel free to tell people about it, and I'll see you next time.